Welcome to another episode of Tea and Cookies. This episode is sponsored by the Faith Learcy family in California. Where's our tea bags we used? She sent us these products specifically for a segment of this nature. Now this is the type of vlog or segment where we're going to react to like a spiritual article or video or something like that. Today's, it's kind of an unfortunate format, but it's what we got to work with. And what it is it's a video, like a podcast, I think, that John Piper responds to the question, is it sinful to watch porn with my spouse? Let's have a cookie first.
You're gonna need one.
Oh, good cookies.
Yeah.
Okay, you ready for this?
Welcome back to the Ask Pastor John podcast with John Piper, and once again we're going to address a sensitive subject today that is not suitable for younger listeners. And sadly, this is a question that we get a lot.
Okay, pause. I'm already triggered. Why is it so sad to get this question?
Sadly, this is a question that we get a lot.
I mean, already, this is pissing me off because there's like already this like I'm better than whoever is asking this question.
It's like being surprised that there's like this in the world or something.
I mean, do you see Jesus talking to people like this where people are like, hey, God, do you think we should be doing this? And he's like, I can't even believe I get this question. And he's the guy that like should be surprised or has the right to be at least. And I feel like this same attitude, like it's so easy to have this with our kids, and I have seen it be nothing but destructive. If our kid comes to me and is like, hey Dad, I was wondering, should I have sex with a bunch of people or murder someone? And if I was like, I can't even believe I have to answer this question.
Or if
it's
you're
so
like,
sad that I even have to answer this.
That is so sad.
Is it sinful to watch pornography with my spouse before sex?
Yes, it is. It is sin. And it is a revolting sin.
Right from the gate, he just says, yes, it is a sin. And it would be cool, I think, to say like, wow, it took a lot of vulnerability for yourself to say this kind of a question, especially in the Christian culture where you're going to get nothing but shame for this. And it's like, well, good job, John Piper. You just shamed this person all over again. I just think it's really unfortunate that he, from the get-go, responds in a way that's just like, doesn't really like let down the person's guard a little bit in a good way. Like,
well, it is I understand that because this is a podcast. He's not talking to the person directly, and he's trying to be as blunt and honest as possible. But it is a very, very clear, unwavering, absolute answer.
It is sin. It is a revolting sin.
So what I expect when I hear an answer like this is, okay, we're going to hear, because we're using words like sin, right? Which is an absolute statement. We're going to hear the biblical backing for this later on. Like there must be specific verses, specific ideas. If you are that absolute and confident about something, like, fine, great, back it up. What I don't really like is his use of the word revolting. Like, he's not really saying revolting to who. And this makes me think he's either saying this is revolting to me or revolting to God. And not only is he saying it's revolting, I feel like he's saying it's uniquely revolting. Now, in the Bible, my understanding is that God is, in a way, revolted by all sin. Anything that is like destructive, because he doesn't sin or commit these types of infractions, this type of holiness that he is and unholiness, which is humans and sin, it doesn't mix, okay? He's revolted. But he's not like uniquely revolted to certain brands of it. Like when Jesus shows up, or even God, he doesn't say like, oh my gosh, you looked at like that type of porn, or you ate the spicy Cheetos, not the regular Cheetos, or you committed this type of murder, but this type of murder is not offensive.
Although Jesus gets kind of hot under the collar with Pharisees who think they know better than he does. We got a little tea bag holder.
Okay.
And what makes it so revolting is that in that sacred moment, very sacred moment,
There's all this lingo. Okay, we have revolting, sacred, and you're gonna hear for the rest of this video, I'm gonna actually keep a count, but we're just gonna keep track of how many spiritual words he uses on the like positive spiritual side and on the negative spiritual side.
is sin, revolting sin. So revolting, sacred, very sacred, sacred, or sacred, corruption, defilement, sinful images.
And it's not like, I'm fine with these words, but when they're not backed up by something else, they're just like manipulative and controlling. And on the negative side, they're like shame-based. Actually, I think on both sides, they're kind of shame-based.
Yeah. Because when he says sacred, that's like supposed to be this positive thing, but he's using it as like a negative as well.
Very sacred moment. I wonder if our questioner even has a concept of sacred or sacred sexuality.
That was condescending.
Are you fucking kidding me right now? What do you mean? Okay, this is weird because I actually historically have respect for John Piper. I owned one of his books. I looked up to him. I knew all these people that listened to his podcast. I have no beef with the guy. But what right do you have to ask this question? Because you're not just asking a question, you're making a statement. I wonder if our questioner has any concept of what is sacred. By whose definition? By yours? To me, this is the age-old problem with religion, Christianity, and interpretation, is we have like our little standard as humans. And we're always looking down upon other people that don't meet our standard, when none of us, according to the Bible, meets God's standard. So it's like two people being in the lifeboat of the Titanic, one making fun of the other person's like shoelaces don't match their socks. And you're both like dying.
Drowning.
It's like, what's more important, the shoelaces or the fact that you're both drowning? Now, I know that's kind of a weird biblical analogy for those of you that didn't grow up in the church, but according to the Bible, like the distance we are from God is so great that any of these other minor differences we have, they're really just that, they're minor differences. So this is something that's actually like really near and dear to my own personal growth. I think I've had to learn to stop judging people just upon the earthly standard that I'm raised by.
Like your own metric.
Yeah, so for example, in the past, I was raised like not having sex with people like as a teenager, or I didn't date much and I didn't really do drugs or the party thing or swear. So when I heard someone was partying or swearing or drinking or having sex, like underage type stuff, I immediately thought like, oh, I'm better than you. Like, if I didn't know anything about their story, all I knew was like, I'm not in sin and you are. And come to find out a couple things the older I got. One is like, when you don't know someone's story, you don't know like where they've come from or actually if they're making progress or not. Let's say that I found out someone is having a beer and they're 19. You know, I could be like, oh my gosh, that's like a sin. That's underage drinking, that's drunkenness, that's breaking the law. Well, like maybe the day before they were doing heroin and they like just quit and decided to stop doing heroin. And instead they're only having like a beer. So maybe in God's eyes, or even from like a scope of addiction and recovery, they're making huge progress. But all I see is this beer. So I'm like, oh, you're terrible. I feel like that's what's happening here. John Piper is in this like very tight Christian bubble and culture, which is like more strict than even culture was in the Bible, by the way. Like there was people in the Bible, not that they had necessarily porn the way we have internet porn, but there was like prostitutes, like polygamy, concubines, like loose sex. And the Bible doesn't say like, yeah, good job, go for that. But you also don't see Jesus being like, oh, I am like so repulsed by you as a prostitute.
Well, I think a really good example in the Bible is in the New Testament is the Samaritan woman. Like Jesus actually pointed out to her that she had like 6 husbands or something like that. Maybe, I don't know, been married 6 times or something like that. But if you go and read it, he doesn't, first of all, he doesn't even start with that. He like talks to her about himself and about like hope and that she could have. And then he like says it as like, not like a judgment, but like, hey, I know you, I know what you have done, and you still can have eternal life. Like, it just wasn't even the point to him. It wasn't the main point. Anyways.
Keep on talking. The more you talk, the more cookies I'm eating.
In that sacred moment, corruption is abounding in three directions: toward Christ, toward the spouse, and the marriage, and toward people. So the spouse and marriage, and toward people in the pornography. In other words, in so many directions, defilement is happening in the mind that carries those sinful images all the way through life, day and night.
I need another cookie. I'm not even really hungry, but I'm like stress eating right now.
Okay, so this is like the crux of his discussion. He said that there's like this defilement and it's sin between you and your spouse and you and God and you and the community. And he doesn't really, for the whole entire rest of the video, he doesn't really go too much more into defining that. He just uses a bunch more of these crazy spiritual words and lingo.
The apex, pure and holy pleasures, inconceivable, pure, sweetest, purest union, poison, putrid, sexual sin. Is sin.
And I feel like he's using fear. He's saying, if you do this, your mind is going to be defiled for the rest of your life.
Which sounds really scary. What's that mean?
Right. And that's the kind of thing that I believed. I believed if I had a sexual fantasy that was kind of like I was ashamed of, I was like really ashamed of it and really afraid that this was just gonna mess me up, like completely mess my sex life up, mess my marriage up.
Mess your purity up.
Yeah.
Now this is like the beef that I have with this video. And I think it could be easily misunderstood what we're saying. And like, oh, this is a pro-porn video. Like, you all should watch porn. It's great, it's awesome. No one should ever say it's bad or causes any destruction. No, that is not our belief. Like, I think it can be very destructive. I think it's really fake. I think it thrives off of taking advantage of people. I think it can create unhealth in marriage and relationships and addiction and individual and blah, 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 blah. But why can't we just say that? Mm-hmm. Why do we have to use all this fancy lingo that Jesus or the Bible never says about it? Mm-hmm. And it makes me feel like we have this attitude like, oh, the Bible's actually not strict enough or scary enough, so we got to step it up a notch ourselves and be stricter and scarier than the Bible. Otherwise, people are going to take advantage of God. Mm-hmm. And I don't think God like needs that. I think if he was that afraid of porn, mm-hmm. he could write himself in the freaking Bible, porn will defile you. But once again, there's all these definitions of like, now all of a sudden, what is porn? And I hate to be all like, what's the word? Like splitting hairs on this or micro. But when someone's using this much language,
blanket statements too.
Blanket statements and absolute mm-hmm. to declare this about really anyone that does this activity at all, whether it's once in your life or 100 times in your life or consistently in a marriage, then I think we should ask that person, hey, if you're coming out and saying I'm da-da-da-da-da-da, like, what is porn? Is it like seeing a naked person? Is it seeing two naked women or people have sex, or is it mm-hmm. on the internet? Or what if it's a statue? Because like this is not a new topic. I mean, mm-hmm. And I think the Bible could have addressed this, way before. But for some reason, it's oddly quiet about it.
When the Bible says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, it is inconceivable that the pleasures Christ has in the church would be awakened and stimulated by his imaging a prostitute to get his juices flowing.
He's saying it's inconceivable that someone would use pornography.
To who?
And to me, it's just like, are you that disconnected from reality?
Yes, he is. I mean, it's inconceivable to you.
Yeah.
I think that's what you should maybe say. It's inconceivable to me. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't get it. And I've spent my last 40 years living in a Christian culture with Christian parents, working at a Christian church, at a Christian college, writing Christian books to Christians.
And he should be like, maybe I should tag team this off to someone who doesn't see this as like inconceivable. To
Now,
actually help people. Because I don't think this helps people.
Once again, I'm not saying this is like good. Like, if you're not into porn and if you come from this background, you know, more power to you. So for me to be like to you, hey, yeah, I think you should use porn to jumpstart your sex life. Like, I wouldn't say that. That's not a recommendation I would make. But if someone is coming from a place where they have used porn, or maybe porn is even a step in the right direction, maybe they decide, you know what? I was having sex with a bunch of people yesterday, and all of a sudden I realized I shouldn't do that anymore. Mm-hmm. But I still use porn just to like get through my day and not commit suicide. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine for that person to come across this video and to be like, it is inconceivable for someone to use porn to meet God? And they're like, what does that say about them and the reality they're experiencing?
Yeah.
And I used to think this, you know, I remember the first time a buddy of mine told me, I used to listen to Pink Floyd and smoke pot, and it was the closest to God that I ever felt. And back then, pot wasn't like legal anywhere in America, and I had never tried it. To me, it was as simple as like, if you're smoking pot, you're away from God. Mm-hmm. If you're not smoking pot, you're closer to God. And I wasn't even willing to entertain like the idea that for someone that could actually be helpful or a step in the right direction for them or a step towards God. And as long as we have these absolute categories that are based on our experience and not what the Bible says, I think it's really, you know, it's not humility when he says that. Like, there is an actual brand of humility where if I'm looking at someone in Africa, I'm like, man, I can't imagine living in a mud hut and worshiping God to drums, like on an animal. Like, I don't get it, but that's really cool that you can do that. Mm-hmm. You know, this is saying, no, it's actually not humanly possible. I understand God, I understand the Bible, I understand your experience and all human culture, and it doesn't fit.
He's like elevating the sex act between two married people to a point where it's like, to me, it gets like, I think I've been like hurt by this. Like that elevation's like unattainable to me. So like if I'm feeling physical pleasure from, you know, just, I don't even know how to articulate it, but like when he talks about the sacred of the blah, 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 and the marriage bed, and the so sacred and this and that, it's like, are you talking about my marriage bed? Because I feel like you're talking about something that's like way up here that's not even like human anymore. And I understand there are aspects of that in the Bible where it talks about, you know, that's a mystery and all that, but I don't know. To me, it's just like, again, I feel like it's just putting it way too high.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be over spiritualized to be spiritual.
Because then I'm like scared to have sex with my husband. I'm like, I might not attain that. Oh no. Maybe we should just not have sex. You know?
I mean, like, what if you want to have fun?
Yeah.
What if you're stressed out?
Right. What if like you're not thinking about how this is a holy act right now? You know, then what?
The moment of sweetest, purest union with the poison of putrid food from pornographic sexual sin. And make no mistake, the performing and filming of pornographic acts is sin. What they are doing is sin. they're not acting for the glory of God.
Just because you say something a bunch of times doesn't make it true. And I get it, you already believe this, but you're not proving it to anyone that it is any more of a sin. You're just like emphasizing so that people already who believe this are gonna be like, hell yeah, 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 yeah. But people that don't believe this or don't follow you or don't understand, I think they're really just gonna be like confused and feel like crap because of this. I don't think you can know everyone's heart, that they're not acting to the glory of God just because they're not in the exact same moral place that you think they should be. Mm-hmm. God doesn't see sin the same way we do, where it's this like culturally shocking thing. So like when someone commits murder, I don't think God's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. I can't believe he did this. Like, he's not glorifying me. Like, there's people that are trapped in sin that I think can still glorify God, but they're actually trapped in behavioral things or cultural things that might be shocking to me. Mm-hmm. Like when we first moved here, this is a great example. This is the example. We heard these people yelling outside their doors at their kids all the time. And it was like, shut up, you little shit, come on in here, I'm gonna kick your ass. You know, we heard this like all the time, and it was like from a movie, like the wrong kind of movie, where you're like, oh my gosh, like people are abusive, people aren't respectful, they're not honoring, they're not loving. Like we put these black and white labels, and we could have made this same video of like, if someone asked the question, is it okay to cuss out your children?
It is sin. It is a revolting sin.
The Bible is so clear about what it says about loving, using your words, using your tongue, and it is a disgrace to think that you could take this blessing and you could blast it with all this vile, disgraceful, sinful, damaging language. That's how that could be packaged. Mm-hmm. But after a while, we come to learn the story of some of our neighbors. Mm-hmm. And we learned how their parents yelled at them, and we come to see the culture of the Midwest a little bit more in a small town where people just use language differently. And while I still wouldn't advise people to talk like that or like say like, hey, that's great, keep on going, it made us more judgmental and a little bit more humble and careful with how quick we apply these labels just because we were shocked by the culture. So now I see my neighbors and I hear some of these things and I think two things, like, wow, like I wouldn't do that right now. That's different from my culture. But then I wonder the second question, which is like, man, I wonder how God sees that. And I wonder if they're making progress today from where they were yesterday. And I wonder what's in their heart right now. Are they really seeking God? Are they being selfish? Because I don't know.
What I'm concerned about is, so let's say this was some wife that sent in this question. Is it sinful to watch porn with my spouse? So she hears this message from John Piper, and now she has the moral high ground on her husband, and she comes back to him and she's like, see, John Piper said
it is sin. It is a revolting sin.
I have a feeling then the guy is either gonna do one of two things, either say F you, or he's just gonna do it covertly now, because it's not helpful. Like, I just can't see, it's not a way to like bridge a marriage, like two like spouses together.
Because he's answering more than the question, and this is what's sneaky about it. I don't know if the Bible says porn is a sin, at least universally. I don't think the Bible universally says it, but I think oftentimes it is a sin if I had to just put my guess out there. So in that way, I'm not even saying I disagree with that statement, but I think what is also being said is it's a worse sin and worthy of judgment by a certain other culture or subtype.
Right.
Because he's not making the same video, or the amount of shock that he's airing out, it doesn't indicate that he views greed at a shopping mall the same way. And maybe he has other videos that say that, but we can't just make these videos and have these opinions about sins that we don't experience. Okay, yeah, that's like most of what this video is, and it goes on and just uses more and more language.
Glory of God, holiness, sin, earthly, righteousness and purity, selfish indulgence, bondage to the flesh, rebellion against God, sin, a sacred, purest, Christ-exalting delusion, contaminating, so pure, so tender, so deep, so holy, vile, vile. You need to have a word like vile, not honored, debased, like an animal sin, revolting sin. Revolting blasphemes Christ's sickness and sin of insults. So let me say to the man, this is a great insult to your wife. If you have tempted her, cajoled her, lured her, persuaded her, seduced her into this pornographic delusion of marital love, you should be ashamed.
I don't agree with him saying you should feel shame. I mean, even if sin is wrong, you have one of two choices according to this guy's belief. Either the dude's a Christian, in which case he's actually free from shame, because while his behavior could be destructive, shame actually makes most of these sins work, and it's not a biblical solution towards either walking out of sin or meeting God. Or he's not a Christian or a believer at all and doesn't even necessarily believe in this sexual code, in which case it makes complete sense why in fact he wouldn't be ashamed and he wouldn't have a concept of this exact code of why it's right or wrong. And maybe we should talk differently to people that don't have that same code as us. Even if you're right, John Piper, like even if he's right about this, like, I don't know, can you imagine if someone like disagreed with you on what type of restaurant to go to, or let's just even say like getting directions on how to get someplace, and like he's like, well, I don't know how to get there, and he's like, well, I think you go this way, and you're like, oh, that is disgusting, that is absolutely abhorrent, that will take you the wrong direction and not get there, you know, you should feel ashamed of that. It's like, no, you just don't know how to, we disagree on how to get there.
I think one of the reasons why this particular sin of watching porn is so elevated in the Christian culture is because sexuality is so elevated in the Christian culture, and so like potential sins of like eating too much or buying too much stuff at the mall, like greed or gluttony, don't really get much of the same energy or charge. And actually, I think probably, anyways, they don't get as much airtime.
So that's the end of this topic. The reason why we're facing this and tearing this argument apart is not because I think porn doesn't matter, or marriage doesn't matter, or sexual purity doesn't matter, but actually it's because I think it is really important. I just don't think this way of talking about it ever works long-term for anyone, whether it's people inside religion, outside religion, inside marriage, outside marriage. So this just like Cammie said before, this just makes people like hide it, feel ashamed, when really maybe they shouldn't be. Even if they're wrong, like you guys, it's okay to be wrong and to not feel shame. That's what Jesus' message was I can draw you out of shame into me, and you will leave these behaviors behind. You know, you will walk away from things that are more destructive and more twisted and more fake. You know, that is so important to happen. But when we use shame and fear and manipulation and exaggeration,
you have to have something better to replace your sin with. Like, just to tell someone that what you're doing is wrong isn't enough for them to change. Like, you actually have to replace it with something that's like better. And what we believe is that like having a relationship with Jesus is better than sin a lot of times.
And having an awesome sex life is better than having a fake ass sex life.
Yeah.
But it's not just because it's like sacred and holy and the other one's sin.
Yeah.
It's like, it speaks for itself. We don't have to add language to help God out by scaring people more. I gotta go. That was tea and cookies.
My hands are sweating.
Oh, you're getting like intense.
I know. I was like, I was like super cold. And then I got like really hot and bothered, like literally hot.
Thank you for the tea and cookies, Faith. We will see you next time on Tea and Cookies with Cammie.
Cammie.
Oh. Tea and Cookies with Ben and Cammie.